Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to stately Fawn Manor, where Roger and I have returned. And today we're going to be talking about something a little unusual. We're going to be talking about movies today, which almost never happens because we always talk about books. Pretty much always we talk about books, but every once in a while, on rare occasions, we will talk about movies. And this is one of those rare occasions because an unusual thing happened in that I recently saw 3 new films. And I never watch new movies anymore, practically. But I did recently watch some new movies, 3 of them. And I'll talk about those movies today and what I thought of them and movies in general. I don't watch too many movies anymore. One of the reasons for this is that I spend all my free time reading. I read every moment that I can that I have a free moment. And I just find books more satisfying nowadays than watching a film. Very often, and here's the thing, I used to watch a lot more movies than I do now. And I think part of the reason for that is that new movies tend to suck. I think new movies tend to suck. Not all of them, of course, but enough new movies just suck that I've lost my enthusiasm for film, I think. We're at a point now where the movies that do come out, they tend to be the same old thing. You know, you've seen these movies before, and they just keep coming out. New versions of themselves keep coming out, and there's a certain lack of creativity and imagination in a lot of the movies that come out. And so it's interesting that the films that I saw, 2 of them were remakes. Well, one of them is a remake, and one of them is it's a reimagining. It's not really a remake at all. And one of them is a sequel to a film that didn't need a sequel. So, of course, of all the new movies that come out, I chose those 3 to go see. One of them was good. One of those 3 movies was good. But, you know, that's just Hollywood now. They want to go for the sure thing, probably, or what they think is a sure thing, because everything costs so much to make. And this brings me to the other thing that I can't stand about new movies. And this is probably the thing, more than anything else, that has driven me away from watching film. And that is bad CGI. I have grown to despise and hate bad CGI. To be clear, I have nothing against CGI itself when it's done well. And I understand that there are reasons why CGI is often done poorly, even in movies that are tremendously expensive. But as an audience member, I don't care. I don't care what those reasons are. If you have a movie and you spent $1 billion making this movie, it should look good. The effects should be good. And if you look back at some of them, I mean, there's so many examples that continue to come out where the CGI is bad to awful. Think of films like Justice League or Heaven Help Us, The Flash, which was an abomination. I mean, there's so many movies like that where this was an expensive movie to make. It should look good. The effects should be good. It shouldn't look like a cartoon, you know. So, I mean, it's like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where you have like real people interacting with cartoon characters. That's what it feels like very often because the CGI tends to be so bad. Even when in movies that otherwise might be okay. I'm thinking of The Black Panther, for example. A film that wasn't nearly as good as everybody said it was, but it had the potential to be okay. But its visual effects were terrible. It had terrible CGI. You had characters that seemed to be weightless, kind of floating around, and nothing seemed to exist in the real world or to take place in actual reality. It all looked exactly like what it was, which was computer-generated imagery. And there's so much of it, and it's so obvious that it just drives me crazy. And there's really something to be said for the old-time practical effects, even when they looked bad or unrealistic. very often they at least looked like they existed in real space. And even when they didn't, with things like stop motion, for example, which is jerky and unrealistic, and you could see it a mile off, and you could even back in the old days. But that you knew took time and effort to do, which gives it kind of a charm and a dignity that bad CGI just doesn't have. Because there's no excuse for its existence, I think. No good excuse, really. So I should have known better to go and watch a film called Gladiator II, which is the first movie we're going to talk about today. Gladiator II. So I went and saw Gladiator II. So this is a movie that I should have known better, because if ever there was a movie that did not need a remake, or excuse me, a sequel, if ever there was a movie that didn't need a sequel, it was Gladiator. And Ridley Scott, his movies, when they're good, are usually so good that it's easily to forgive or forget when he makes bad movies. And he does make bad movies, and you never really know going in whether this movie's going to be good, bad, or forgettable. And this one was bad. And I knew going in that it was probably going to be bad. And yeah, there was no excuse for this movie. And there were some things that looked pretty good in this movie. Some of the fight scenes, some of them were decent. Some of the action was decent. But there's no excuse for this movie to exist. Gladiator 2, really. It adds nothing to the original film Gladiator. I mean, there's no reason to make it in the first place. And of course, what killed it, most of all for me, was, you guessed it, bad CGI. In fact, terrible CGI. This movie was brought down by CGI monkeys. The same dreadful creatures that took down the fourth Indiana Jones movie. Bad CGI monkeys. You got to watch out for those things. There was a scene in Gladiator 2 that was so wretchedly awful that involved a battle with bad CGI monkeys that it was almost incredible to watch. It was mind-boggling, this scene, how bad it was. I don't recommend you actually sit through Gladiator 2. There's no reason to. But surely that scene by itself is probably on YouTube or someplace. And you could just see the CGI monkey scene on its own. If you can do that, watch it. You won't believe your eyes. It's so bad. Now, this goes for other CGI animals that are in this film. In fact, while watching it, I wondered if anybody making Gladiator 2 had ever actually seen an animal before. It was bad. It was not a good movie. I don't recommend it at all. Like I said, there were some good visuals. There was some good action. I guess it could be viewed as a sort of campy sword and sorcery, not sword and sorcery, but sword and sandal kind of nonsensical film. It was as bad as I should have expected it to be. And it certainly didn't live up to the first movie, which I thought was good. Gladiator was a good movie. And yeah, you had those tigers in the first movie that didn't look so great. But you know what? That was 25 years ago. How did the visual effects not improve in 25 years? This is the thing. Anyway, Gladiator 2. Don't watch that movie. Don't suffer. Don't suffer through Gladiator 2. But the next couple movies were horror movies, so I expected them to be better. And so I watched the new Nosferatu, which is based off a 100-year-old silent film that was an adaptation of Dracula, an unauthorized adaptation of Dracula, where they changed the names so you wouldn't know it was Dracula, but clearly it was Dracula, and they got in trouble for making it. They got sued. And so I think they were ordered to destroy all the prints of the original Nosferatu, but fortunately they didn't, because the original Nosferatu is an excellent movie with a very creepy vampire, Count Orlok, who was really Dracula. That was a good vampire. And so I didn't expect much when I watched the new Nosferatu, even though the director, Let me not get his. It's Robert Eggers. Robert Eggers. Robert Eggers made the new Nosferatu. I've seen his movies before, and I've liked the few that I've seen. I think he's only made a few, right? I thought The Witch was really, really good, and I think that's probably his. I think that's still his best movie. But this movie, Nosferatu, actually turned out to be a good movie. It was good. It was a good Dracula film. It was unusual because it was not based on the novel. It's a direct remake of the first Nosferatu film with some significant changes. And so there are a lot of changes to this story if you compare it to the original novel of Dracula, but that's always the case in Dracula movies. Dracula movies are almost never based on the, or closely based on the book. They always make huge changes, but in this movie, the changes that they made worked for the film. I'm thinking particularly of the very beginning of the film and the end of the film, which worked really well, and the acting was good. Lily Rose Depp was excellent, and the whole film kind of hinges on her performance, really. So it had to be good, and she was really good. The film looks great. In this movie, the visual effects are done really well. Like I said, I have nothing against CGI when it's done well, and in this movie, it's mostly done well. And then we have the vampire, Orlok, Dracula, who is probably the most disgusting, loathsome Dracula I've ever seen in a movie. He's just gross, which actually makes him closer to the book's version of Dracula than most Draculas. Because in the book, Dracula was kind of gross. He had bad breath. He was just a creepy character. Not physically attractive at all. This Dracula in Nosferatu, or this Orlok in Nosferatu, is just foul. He's just a gross, dangerous monster. And he is extremely dangerous. Again, going back to the novel, you had a character that was very dangerous, and this character is that. He looks just like he should look, which he looks like a dead Transylvanian nobleman. And, and he looks exactly like that. And so I was pretty impressed by this film. It was a good movie. Willem Dafoe plays the Van Helsing character, and he's great in that role. He's probably one of the best Van Helsings I've seen on film. So I was very happy with Nosferatu. I thought it was excellent. It's one of those movies that people seem to love or hate, which is a good sign for a horror movie usually. I've heard people kind of grumble about the pace, which can be slow. Yes, it can be, but I didn't feel it too much. I was pretty engaged during the whole film. So this was a surprise, Roger, in that we actually had a decent new movie. A good horror film. Like I said, I don't think it's his best. I think The Witch was better. But this is certainly one of the best Dracula movies I've seen. So yeah, Nosferatu was good. But then I watched The Wolfman, or in this case, Wolfman. Who's the guy that directed this? It was Leigh Whannell. He's done a bunch of horror movies. And some of them are good, some of them are not so good. Mostly they were not so good. But he did this new movie, Wolfman. And so this is the third version of this is the third movie called either The Wolfman or Wolfman. Back in 2010, there was a remake of the original 1940s Wolfman. The original Wolfman, I highly recommend. The original Wolfman was great. Probably the best werewolf movie, in my opinion. It was fantastic. The remake, not so much, from 2010. Although, in a lot of, I mean, it suffered from some bad CGI, that movie. Unnecessarily bad CGI in the 2010 Wolfman movie, but altogether, it was probably more entertaining than the new Wolfman. So the new Wolfman bears almost no relation to the original Wolfman movie. All it shares is the title, Wolfman, and that it's a werewolf movie. Kind of. It's a kind of werewolf movie. Also, the main character's father does play an important part in this movie, just as the main character's father did in The Wolfman and the sequel to The Wolfman. So there is that. There's also the idea of this character who is being changed into a monster, or who changes into a monster and can become a danger to those he loves. This is something you expect from most werewolf movies. And you get that in this movie. So there are some familiar things in this movie. This werewolf is odd, though. First of all, it takes this werewolf an entire movie to change into a werewolf. Most werewolves, they can get it done pretty quick. This guy, nah, this werewolf sucks. He takes the whole movie to turn into a werewolf. It's a slow process turning into a werewolf in this movie. And one of the things I think just doesn't work in this movie is that the werewolf in this movie, actually there are a couple werewolves in this movie, but the werewolf in this movie is not a supernatural being. This is caused by a disease. Like rabies, only it turns you into a wolf creature, sort of. And I think, this could just be me, I think the werewolf is a creature. I mean, the Wolfman is not a zombie. A werewolf is not a zombie, okay? Zombies, that can kind of work. But the werewolf, this is a curse. It's the curse of the werewolf. And that gives this creature power, you know. He's under a curse. It's a supernatural curse. And for it just to be a disease just doesn't seem to be as powerful or as interesting, frankly. And so when I watched it and I realized where this movie was going and what the werewolf was in this movie, I just like, okay, so it's a science fiction kind of werewolf, you know. This is not a supernatural werewolf. Okay, I'll just have to take it for what it is. And so that part didn't work, but the movie itself is an okay horror movie. This guy, the director, Leigh Whannell, whose name I keep forgetting, or Whannell, I don't know, sorry. He seems to specialize in making movies that are okay. And this movie is okay. You know, if you have nothing better to do, this is an okay monster movie. It is also a monster movie that is very predictable. Once you get past the unique werewolf situation where you have a werewolf a guy who's caught a disease and is slowly turning into a monster, it's very similar to Cronenberg's The Fly in that regard. Only The Fly was a lot better. But this movie felt more like that movie than it did the Wolfman, the original Wolfman. And some of the things were interesting in this film. Looking at things from the main character's perspective as he turns into a monster, that stuff was all interesting. It was just too little. It couldn't carry the movie, you know, the transformation of this guy into a creature. And so much of it was predictable. I think there was something that was supposed to be a surprise, you know, that was supposed to surprise you about what happens in this movie, that is just so not a surprise. I mean, it had to be what it was. And the movie kind of has to turn out the way it does. And it's that kind of thing. So it was a disappointment. It was a disappointment as a werewolf movie. The werewolf, he looks different. He's a different looking werewolf. Doesn't really look like a werewolf. Kind of looks like a half werewolf, So the effects were not bad. It was just, like I say, it was just okay. It was just okay. I actually think the 2010 Wolfman was more entertaining. And that's not something you want to hear, I think. But I think it was true. Not everything in this movie, like I said, was bad. The movie mostly looks good. But it was just... It was nothing that'll make me want to see anything else that this guy does. Let's put it that way. It was a disappointment. So, which is, I think, the state of film, which is why I don't watch many movies. Every once in a while, you'll get a movie like Nosferatu, which is good. But I think for the most part, it's just like, I could just read a book. I could just read a book, which I think is what I'll do now. Okay, guys, I'll shut up now. I will catch you next time.